What's up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos. I'm your host, Bales. This one is for Monday, November 1st. We are already flying through the season. It's actually getting pretty crazy. You guys have not seen me since the Friday podcast. Sriracha took over the weekend and did a fantastic job. So I am back here for the Monday podcast. If you guys remember, or if you watched the Friday one, I asked you to tell me how many points Jimmy Butler would score in the comments. The correct answer was 32. Nobody won in terms of hitting it on the head, but Mr. Incredible did guess 29, which is only 3 away, and that is the Price is Right's winner compared to, I believe, the 2 or 3 that we did before this. Not a single person won or even guessed below what they actually scored. So we did have a winner in terms of Price is Right. Closest guess without going over of Mr. Incredible at 29. But we can start over. Leave in the comments how many points you believe. Let's go with someone weird tonight. Cole Anthony scores against the Minnesota Wolves. So in the comments, your point prediction, not fantasy point, real life point prediction for Cole Anthony on the season. This is essentially his game log. It is lengthy at 7, but 10, 10, 29, 12, 24, 24, 15. A lot of different ways you can go with this one. He gets a matchup against the Minnesota Wolves. So let me know in the comments. Also, while you're at it, if you enjoy the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. You can turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stuff. And then obviously, if you have any questions outside of, leaving the comment of Cole Anthony, if you have any actual questions or anything, just drop that in the comments below as well. And I'll be in here throughout the day to answer them. Or you can join our free Discord, chatdfs.com. Head over to the website, dfskarma.com. You can find it there as well. You can find it with one of the links below in the description. You can also find our core plays there, which gets you our core plays, our projections. It gets you premium articles. It also gets you into the premium chats of the Discord. So a lot going on there, which is why I do recommend picking up a package. But I believe at this point we can get on with the slate. For having a 9-game slate, there isn't necessarily a ridiculous amount of injury news. There is a lot that's going to change the slate just based on who's in, who's out, and everything, but nothing where like every single game has multiple players questionable or anything, so that's actually a plus. Just starting out, Malcolm Brogdon and Karis LeVert, both questionable. Jeremy Lamb, doubtful. And Doug McDermott is out once again for the San Antonio Spurs. Nerlens Noel is questionable. Daniel Gafford is questionable. Obviously, a lot of people believe that Rui Hachimura was close to coming back, but I don't believe that's expected to happen yet. So obviously, if Gafford's out, Montrezl Harrell is going to continue to make an elite option. Dylan Brooks will continue to miss time. Gary Harris is now questionable, while Etuan Moore and Michael Carter-Williams are both out for Orlando. And then obviously you have Marcus Morris out for the Los Angeles Clippers. Meanwhile, Serge Ibaka is actually getting close to a return, but he will also be out tonight. Quite a bit of injury news that could change stuff, and obviously there's guys that kind of just go on the list throughout the day, whether they're feeling sore or anything. So we can move to the position by position with a 9-game slate. Once again, I don't want to just give you guys a ridiculous amount of plays. I'm going to outline basically my favorites. And if you have any questions on any players, please drop them in the comments and I will answer, because obviously I cannot hit on every single player that I believe is going to be a good play tonight. That would just be way too many to give you guys. At the top of point guard, it feels crazy since everyone's under 10,000. But I feel like the number one option is going to be Dejante Murray. 48 plus fantasy points in each of his last 4. He scored 71 against the Lakers. Now gets a really good matchup against the Indiana Pacers, who don't play defense very well. Just a really good spot for Dejante Murray. Obviously, a triple-double upside. He also comes with plenty of steal potential. He can add a couple of blocks as well, but that's much more unlikely. I do think that Dejante Murray, even at 9,200, makes a very good option in the specific matchup against Indiana tonight. I also like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Can't pronounce that right. He caught fire over a 3-game span. He scored 40 plus in each of them, flashed 50 plus upside. He's coming off of a bad game where he played limited minutes in a blowout against Golden State. He gets a matchup against the Los Angeles Clippers, though, who have really struggled against point guards. The only concern, I guess, the major concern here is Oklahoma City has been blown out quite a bit on the road this season. Now, obviously, the matchup against the Clippers is less than ideal. At home, they've been significantly more competitive, and that's actually when Gilgeous-Alexander has been at his best. So it's tough for me to pull the trigger on him specifically in cash games, but I do think just because of the matchup in GPPs, he's a really, really good option. Continuing kind of with the San Antonio Spurs, Derrick White is point guard, shooting guard eligible, and still feels a little bit underpriced, especially for this matchup at 6,400. So I have no problems if you want to try to get him into your lineups. TJ McConnell has been surprisingly bad in big minutes with Karis LeVert, Malcolm Brogdon both out. If they're out again tonight, I still think that McConnell's a viable option for his price tag. It's just way too cheap for him playing 30 plus minutes, but he has been oddly bad, which generally you haven't seen when he's been given bigger minutes for Indiana. So that's kind of a little bit of a weird spot. And then if you want to drop all the way down at 3,600, Shake Milton is playing limited minutes. He played 16 in his first game, 19 in his second game. I would assume that it kind of just continues to creep its way up, and then eventually he'll be playing full minutes, but not yet. With that being said, he scored 21.25 and 24.25, so he's playing extremely well, taking plenty of shots, double digits in both games. He's taking a decent amount of threes as well. So I do think that at 3,600, Shake Milton is in play against Portland, and that's probably where you're going to go if you really need to save some salary at this position. Moving to shooting guard, there are a few plays at the top that I don't mind. Like I wouldn't try to talk you off of Bradley Beal against Atlanta, Zach LaVine against Boston. I don't have any issues with that. Jaylen Brown as well. He kind of oddly talked that he wasn't feeling like himself completely after dealing with COVID. Yet, I guess he's been super inconsistent. He has 2 games with fewer than 20 fantasy points. With that being said, in his other 3 games, 47, 53.75, and 76.25. Regardless of what happens, he's locked into big minutes. He's locked into a massive role. I don't necessarily love the matchup against Chicago, but I'm not really going to shy away from it either. So I do think that Jaylen Brown is in play, but my top option would most likely be Anthony Edwards. He's only down to 8,200. I guess it's his highest price tag, but I just meant down from someone like Jaylen Brown, who's up at almost 9K. But 8,200. He scored 40 plus in 4 of his first 5. He's coming off a bad game against Denver where he didn't shoot overly well, but still getting around 20 shots per game. He's taking a ton of threes, and he comes with the ability to add rebounds and assists. So I do think at 8,200 in a plus matchup against Orlando, Anthony Edwards does make a lot of sense here. As you continue down, shooting guards always kind of an odd position where I generally don't like that many players. I do think that there are a few that make sense. Will Barton at 5,700, I feel like he can be used basically whenever, as long as Jamal Murray, once they get fully healthy and Barton's role kind of diminishes a little bit. Obviously, you can't just use him at that price tag, but for now, I think that's fine. If Karis LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon are out again, Chris Duarte is a really good option. He's been super safe for 5,600. And I like the matchup against San Antonio here as well. Moving down a bit, I think there's 2 options for cheap here that make sense. But one of them is at small forward, I guess both of them are small forward eligible. I'll save one for small forward just to make sure we have plenty of plays as well. But Josh Giddey at 5,200 is kind of a joke of a price tag. He struggled a little bit early in the season. Now he's locked into big minutes. He's playing a big role. He's extremely versatile, 27 plus fantasy points in 4 consecutive. Gets a good matchup against the Clippers, whose defense I'm not really overly scared of. And it just kind of comes down to if his shot's falling, he looks really good. If not, he still adds the peripherals. 52 is oddly cheap. He was just 5,800 the other night. I think that was a little less than a week ago. So I have no clue really what DraftKings is doing, why they dropped his price so much. Another guy that's a little bit too cheap, I think he comes with more risk, is Terrence Mann. If his shot's falling or if he's actually attacking the basket, he comes with plenty of upside because he can add I guess he can add peripherals in each of the other 4 categories along with points. But I mean, he's coming off 29 minutes in his last game. It just seems like his role is going to get increasingly bigger as he's kind of ready for it. But 4,600 is too cheap, especially for tournaments. I probably don't go there in cash games. I don't think you have to. And then the other odd option that we have to add is Cody Martin. It just feels like, he's kind of playing the solid minutes regardless. He's only 3,900. Again, with Terry Rozier finally looking healthy, I don't trust it in cash games, but I do think that you can take a shot on him in tournaments. At small forward, you're not going to be able to talk me off of Paul George. He just comes with too much upside, even at 10-7. That's not my favorite play, though. I do think it's 100% fine if you want to use him. But he's not someone that I'm absolutely dying to spend up for or anything like that. I guess the position's kind of weird. I'm okay with guys like Miles Bridges, Gordon Hayward. They don't really bother me. I'm not trying to lock them in or anything. I think that Kyle Kuzma is reasonable as well. OG Anunoby is a really good option, but it feels like the guy that kind of stands out, and he's now priced out pretty high at 6,800. But Scotty Barnes has looked fantastic for the Toronto Raptors. I don't know if anyone saw the clip, but it took him 2 dribbles to go coast to coast for a dunk. It was absolutely insane. Locked into big minutes. His offensive game is working relatively well. He adds rebounds each night. He flashed the potential for assists against Indiana, so the triple-double upside quietly is there. It's not overly likely that he's able to get to 10 assists, but it is, and then he can add a couple steals or blocks on any given night as well, and he's still under 7,000. So I do think that is a really good option. Same team, Gary Trent Jr. He only played 23 minutes against Indiana, but he was locked into bigger minutes. Prior to that, his shot just really wasn't falling in that game, so could potentially be that they just didn't really want to give him a ton of minutes if he was shooting so much and not efficiently, but he has looked good for the majority of the season. He comes with significantly more upside than his price tag even remotely suggests. I believe he scored over 35 fantasy points earlier in the year, and he's still under 5,000. So Gary Trent Jr., just a really good option at either shooting guard or small forward, and really makes a lot of sense because you get the forward or guard eligibility as well. So now you can use him in 5 different positions instead of just 4. So really, really good option. I also believe that Desmond Bane is still too cheap. He scored 26 plus in each of his games. He scored 26 in only 26 minutes against Miami, and he should probably play 30 plus in this game tonight. So I do think that Desmond Bane at 5,300 is still, kind of far too cheap for the type of upside and even safety that he possesses. So that's a cash or GPP option. If you want to use like Sabonis, Tatum, even Randall, all of them are fine at power forward. They're all really good options. DeMar DeRozan, I would probably have a tier below them, but he's at least reasonable for 8,600. And I'm not necessarily opposed to Tobias Harris, but I just don't think that he has the same upside as someone like Jason Tatum. And it's not like their price tags are that far off anymore. The same can be said for Julius Randle when comparing to Tobias Harris. As you move down, there's plenty of options. A lot of them are small forward eligible. We kind of, briefly hit on Bridges, Hayward, Anunoby, Kuzma. All of them can be used. John Collins at 6,800 in a really good matchup. I think there's plenty of upside there since, Washington does struggle against bigs. They kind of funnel everything in there. 38 minutes. John Collins scored 48 fantasy points. Pretty ridiculous shooting, 14 of 16 in that game, but they don't really have anyone defensively that's going to stop him. So I do think that's a fine option. Wendell Carter Jr. Has finally been playing well. He's not the safest option. We just saw him play 17 minutes against the Detroit Pistons, but he comes with a ton of upside, especially at only 5,700. So that's kind of more or less a tournament option that I'm interested in on this slate. As you move down power forward, there's not a ton to love. Just not that much. I honestly don't even know if I go down essentially below. I would say probably the lowest I'd probably go at this point would probably be Wendell Carter at 5,700. I think if you want someone like Franz Wagner, I think that's fine. He's played extremely well. It's just at 5,000, I probably rather would get the salary relief option from somewhere else, and then I don't really have to kind of bank on someone like Wagner at this point. But I do think that he's at least reasonable if for some odd reason you come to power forward and absolutely need some salary relief there. At center, you're not going to convince me that you can't play Nikola Jokic. He scored 68 fantasy points against Minnesota the other night. Right back to him. The only games that he's actually struggled with this season have been 1 against Utah when he hurt his knee, and 2 against Dallas in his first game back from hurting his knee. And that game was a blowout, so he played limited minutes in both of them. If you look at the game against Utah, I think he played 15 minutes and scored over 40 fantasy points. Against Dallas, he played 25 minutes, scored over 45. So he actually performed well even in those games when he essentially was just playing half the game, a little bit under half the game in the one. So I do think that Nikola Jokic is completely fine in any leagues. You can essentially say that Karl Anthony Towns, Joel Embiid, just because Jokic is so good that Embiid and Towns can be used in tournaments. The same can be said for any of the power forwards that we kind of mentioned as well. Clint Capella is an interesting option. He hasn't played over 30 minutes in any game, but he has played up to 29, so we know that the minutes could be there, and obviously gets a great matchup against Washington. In their last matchup, he only played 23 minutes. He scored 19.5 fantasy points. Not great, but what were they going to do with John Collins when he was shooting, 16 of 18 in that game and just doing a little bit of everything that they needed from a big? So I do think that Clint Capella is tournament option on this slate. Mo Bamba, I've been riding for quite some time. It always seems that when I make a bet on him at this point, he really struggles, and then when I don't, he goes off. So maybe I just don't bet him tonight. I play him in DFS and reap the benefits. But Bamba is still, I guess he's up to 7-1, but still a little bit too cheap. I think the relatively obvious option for tonight, assuming Gafford doesn't play, is going to be Montrezl Harrell. Last 3 games, 42, 56, and 45. He's just way too cheap, under 7,000. I would assume that he will be chalky against Atlanta, who he just played and scored the 56.25 fantasy points against them. He looked outstanding in that game. So I do think that Montrezl Harrell is a very good option there, and he probably will be the chalkiest center, assuming Gafford doesn't play. Center's never really a position that I overly want to save money at. I do think you can. Steven Adams is still a little bit too cheap. He hasn't been the dominant version of himself because he hasn't played more than 21 minutes in 3 straight games. A little bit odd, but the matchups weren't there. Now he gets a matchup against the Denver Nuggets, and they'll probably need him as a bigger body there. So I do think that he's viable at 4,900. Precious Achiuwa finally came back down to earth. At the same time, 4,700 is too cheap for the pure upside. So I don't mind it if you want to go there. I do think there's plenty of risk. The problem is that he's a very small center. So if Toronto doesn't like the matchup for him, they're just going to pull him. And Mitchell Robinson is a relatively large man. So I could see him getting, 20 minutes and Toronto not really wanting to deal with that. But at the same time, they've played him against bigs before, and he does come with plenty of upside as long as he's getting a decent amount of minutes. So at 4,700, I do think that you can take the shot on that. That about wraps it up, though. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Again, comment how many points you believe Cole Anthony will score tonight. We're playing Price is Right style, which means you want to hear the ding of being right on the dot. But closest below, please don't bet 1 point because that is still a very cheap way to win. Although if everyone else goes over, you will win. So you just got to decide what kind of person you are. Again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. You can check all of our content out at dfskarma.com. We have free content, premium content, anything you need. All the links are also in the description below. But until then, good luck tonight. Hopefully everyone's screens are filled with green.